Since the dawn of human consciousness, we have been haunted by the fragility of our own memory. The spoken word vanishes into the air the moment it is uttered. So, we carved symbols into stone to make our thoughts permanent. We built vast, towering libraries to house our collective knowledge. But physical information is vulnerable. Libraries burn, paper rots, ink fades. When the digital revolution arrived in the 20th century, we believed we had finally conquered the problem of forgetting. We believed that by translating human knowledge into the binary language of computers, we had made it immortal. But we were wrong. We quickly discovered that storing millions of pieces of information in a computer was the easy part. Finding the right piece of information when you actually needed it was a mathematical nightmare. We had essentially built a massive, infinite digital warehouse, dumped billions of unlabeled boxes onto the floor, and turned out the lights. Today, every time you swipe a credit card, book a seat on an airplane, log into your bank account, or order a package to your front door, a miraculous, invisible grid organizes millions of data points in a fraction of a millisecond to make it happen. Our entire modern civilization rests entirely on the back of this silent digital architecture. Yet, the creation of this invisible grid is one of the most fiercely suppressed, bitterly fought, and heavily dramatic stories in the history of technology. It is a story of a lone, visionary mathematician who realized the world was organizing information completely wrong, a massive corporate empire that tried to bury his genius to protect their profits, and the brash, hungry startup that stole his blueprint to build a multi-billion-dollar empire. This is the untold story of the relational database, the silent engine of the modern world. To understand the impossible problem that needed solving, you have to transport yourself back to the 1960s. The world was gripped by the space race. Humanity was reaching for the moon, and the Apollo missions required organizing an unimaginable amount of logistical information. Millions of individual parts, thousands of contractors, and endless engineering specifications needed to be tracked. To handle this, the aerospace industry turned to the undisputed king of computing, International Business Machines, universally known as IBM. IBM built a massive software system to organize the Apollo data called the Information Management System, or IMEPS. IMEPS was what computer scientists call a hierarchical database. To understand how it worked, imagine a massive, physical filing cabinet. In a hierarchical system, data is stored in a rigid, physical tree structure. You have a root folder, which contains subfolders, which contain individual files. If you wanted the computer to find a specific piece of data, let us say, the phone number of an engineer working on the lunar lander in Houston, you could not just ask the computer for the phone number. You had to write a highly complex, custom program that physically navigated the digital tree. You had to tell the computer to first go to the personnel drive, then physically read down the tape to the Texas folder, then physically move down to the Houston subfolder, and finally retrieve the engineer's file. This meant that every time a business wanted to ask a new question about their own data, they had to hire expensive programmers to spend weeks writing custom navigations. Furthermore, if you ever upgraded your computer hardware or simply moved the data to a different physical disk, every single navigation program you had ever written would instantly break because the physical path to the data had changed. The business world was drowning. Banks, airlines, and insurance companies thence were spending 80% of their entire computer budgets just maintaining these brittle physical pathways. Data was essentially trapped in a concrete maze of its own making. The digital age was about to suffocate under its own weight. Enter Edgar F. Codd, known to his friends as Ted. Ted Codd was not your typical IBM corporate man. He was an Oxford-educated mathematician, a former pilot in the Royal Air Force, and a deep, abstract thinker. In the late 1960s, Codd was working at an IBM research laboratory in San Jose, California. He looked at the hierarchical databases like IMS and was absolutely disgusted. To a pure mathematician, The idea that the logical meaning of data was tied to its physical location on a magnetic tape was an architectural tragedy. It was chaotic, messy, and fundamentally flawed. Cod believed that data should be entirely independent of the hardware that stored it. You should not have to know how a car engine works to drive to the grocery store, and you should not have to know the physical layout of a hard drive to find a customer's address. Cod retreated into the realm of pure abstract mathematics. He looked for a way to liberate data from the physical realm, and he found his savior in a branch of mathematics known as first-order predicate logic and set theory. Cod envisioned a completely new way to organize human knowledge. He proposed discarding the rigid branching trees and the complex physical pathways. Instead, he argued that all data should be stored in simple two-dimensional tables, which he called relations. A table of customers, a table of products, a table of orders. Each table has rows and columns. That is it. No physical links, no invisible wires. But here was the true, earth-shattering genius of Cod's design, because the data was organized. In these simple mathematical tables, you could use a standardized language to ask the database a question. You did not have to write a custom program telling the computer how to navigate a maze. You simply told the computer what you wanted, and the database's internal mathematical engine would figure out the fastest way to get it for you. You could instantly join the customer table and the order table together to find out exactly who bought what without ever worrying about where that information physically lived on the spinning disk. In 1970, Ted Cod published his masterpiece, a research paper titled A Relational Model of Data for Large Shared Databanks. It was an elegant, flawless, and completely revolutionary blueprint for the future of information. You might expect that IBM, upon receiving the mathematical key to the future of the digital economy, would have thrown a parade for Ted Cod. Instead, they treated him like a dangerous radical. When Cod presented his relational model to the executives at IBM, the reaction was pure, institutional hostility. IBM was currently making hundreds of millions of dollars selling their old, hierarchical IMS system to the largest corporations and governments on Earth. This IMS was their cash cow. The executives looked at Cod's brilliant new mathematical tables and realized a terrifying truth. If IBM built and sold this new, incredibly easy-to-use relational database, it would instantly cannibalize their own massive profits from IMS. Why would anyone pay for expensive IBM programmers to navigate the old physical maze if they could just use Cod's magical tables? So, IBM made a ruthless, deliberate decision to bury the future. They actively suppressed Cod's work. They strictly forbade their salespeople from even mentioning the relational model to customers. They relegated Cod to the fringes of the research department, treating him as an academic nuisance who did not understand the realities of business. Cod was deeply frustrated. He knew he had solved the fundamental problem of digital data, but he was trapped inside a massive corporate bureaucracy that was highly incentivized to keep the world living in the dark ages. For years, Cod's brilliant 1970 paper sat largely ignored in academic journals, collecting dust while the business world continued to drown in hierarchical spaghetti code. But in the technology industry, ideas are like water. If you try to dam them up, they will inevitably find a crack to leak through. Across the country, a young, brash, highly aggressive programmer named Larry Ellison was working as a contractor. Ellison was hungry, ambitious, and actively looking for an opportunity to build an empire of his own. One day, Ellison stumbled across a technical journal containing Ted Cod's paper on the relational database model. He read it, and his mind was blown. He instantly understood the profound magnitude of what Cod was proposing. He saw that the relational model was not just an academic theory, it was the inevitable, absolute future of all human computing. But Ellison saw something else too. He saw that IBM, the undisputed titan of the industry, had published the architectural blueprints for the future, but they were too terrified of their own current success to actually build it. They had left the vault door wide open. Ellison did not wait around. He recruited two brilliant colleagues, Bob Miner and Ed Oates, and with barely over $1,000 in starting capital, they founded a tiny startup company in 1977. Their mission was simple and audacious. They were going to take IBM's discarded blueprint, build the world's first commercially viable relational database, and sell it before IBM even realized what had hit them. They named their flagship product Oracle. The early days of Oracle were a frantic, high-stakes gamble. Ellison was a master salesman, selling the dream of the relational database to clients before the software even fully worked. But the mathematical foundation that Cod had laid was so solid that the Oracle engineering team was able to bring the vision to life. They adopted the standardized language for asking the table's questions, which became known as SQL, or Structured Query Language. When Oracle launched, it hit the corporate world like a tidal wave. Companies realized they no longer needed to spend a fortune on custom programming just to generate a quarterly sales report. They could simply type a SQL query, and Cod's beautiful mathematical tables would instantly align to give them the answer. Oracle sold their system to the Central Intelligence Agency, they sold it to massive banks, and they sold it to airlines. The tiny startup exploded into a software juggernaut. Back at IBM headquarters, the executives eventually woke up in a cold sweat. They watched in sheer horror as Larry Ellison's startup captured the enterprise database market right out from under them, using the exact mathematical theory that their own employee had invented. The panic at IBM was palpable. They realized their strategy of protecting their legacy product had resulted in them losing control of the next computing paradigm. In a desperate scramble, IBM completely reversed course. They threw massive resources behind Ted Cod and finally released their own relational database system, known as DB2, frantically trying to catch up to the monster they had inadvertently allowed Ellison to create. The data space wars of the 1980s and 90s were brutal and legally fraught, but the ultimate victor was not a single company. The ultimate victor was Edgar F. Cod. By the turn of the millennium, the relational database had completely conquered the planet. It became the invisible bedrock of the global economy. Today, when you walk into a grocery store and the barcode scanner instantly identifies the price of a carton of milk and subtracts it from the store's inventory, that is a relational database executing a SQL query. When an emergency room doctor pulls up your medical history to ensure you are not allergic to a life-saving medication, that is a relational database connecting your identity to your medical records in milliseconds. Every single e-commerce transaction, every social media post, every logistics supply chain that keeps food on the shelves of your local supermarket operates on the exact mathematical grid that Cod envisioned in his isolated laboratory. We talk endlessly about the microchip, the internet, and artificial intelligence, but none of those technologies could function without a way to store, organize, and retrieve information instantly. The relational database is the central nervous system of human civilization. Ted Cod took the infinite, messy chaos of human knowledge and tamed it with the pure, elegant logic of mathematics. In 1981, Cod finally received the recognition he deserved when he was awarded the Turing Award, the Nobel Prize of Computing. But he remained largely unknown to the billions of people whose lives he organized. This epic saga of suppressed genius, corporate arrogance, and mathematical triumph leaves us with three profound lessons about business, technology, and life. First, the immense danger of the innovator's dilemma. IBM had the smartest people on Earth. They literally invented the future, but they allowed their fear of losing current profits to blind them to the inevitable future. They chose to protect the past instead of building the tomorrow they had already discovered. In your own career and life, you must be willing to disrupt yourself. If you are holding on to an old method, an old product, or an old belief simply because it has worked for you, in the past, you are leaving the vault door open for someone else to build your future, you must have the courage to cannibalize your own success before the world does it for you. The extraordinary power of abstraction. The breakthrough of the relational database was not a faster hard drive or a better wire. It was a change in perspective. Cod realized that the physical reality of the data was holding it back by creating a layer of abstraction, by separating what the user wants from how the machine physically gets it. He unlocked infinite potential. Whenever you are faced with a massive, tangled problem that seems impossible to solve, stop looking at the wires. Take a step back and look for the logical abstraction. Find the higher-level pattern, and the messy physical details will often sort themselves out. Third, ideas are completely worthless without the courage of execution. Ted Codd was a genius who authored a flawless blueprint, but a blueprint is just paper until someone decides to pour the concrete. Ellison did not invent the math, but he had the sheer audacity to believe in the math when the establishment rejected it, and the relentless drive to build it into a reality. The world is full of brilliant ideas sitting in academic journals, buried in corporate research labs, or floating in the minds of people too afraid to act. Success belongs to those who are willing to pick up the discarded blueprint, embrace the risk, and build the machine. We move through a world governed by invisible forces. The next time you effortlessly search for a product online, or watch an airline agent quickly reroute a flight for 300 people with a few keystrokes, take a moment to look past the glowing screen. Remember the labyrinth of physical tape that used to trap our knowledge. Remember the isolated mathematician who turned chaos into tables. And remember that the entire sum of human history, commerce, and connection is held together right now by an invisible grid of pure logic. If you found this deep dive into the hidden architecture of our world as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and check out my other videos, where we peel back the layers of history to reveal the secret forces shaping our reality. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you in the next one.